Hey, my name is Chris Elrod. I'm the senior pastor at Compass Point Church, and I want to thank you for watching the Nines today. I'm going to talk to you for the next few moments about something that unfortunately I know a lot about, and that's being a control freak. And I had to come to grips with that several years ago. When we first launched our church, obviously I was only staff member, and so a lot of things had to go through me, filtered through me, and it was at beginning stages, other than the core team, it was kind of my baby. But as we began to see God move and new people come on, I wasn't letting go of that. It was still my baby, and I was trying to contain that. And what was happening was I was stifling the potential our church had to really go out and do what God had called us to do. Because everything had to filter through me, and nothing was being filtered through God. And I had to come to grips with a couple of things in life. Number one, that great leaders are never control freaks. They're always the guys who are able to pass that leadership on to other people. And number two, God never uses control freaks to do something amazing for his kingdom, because control freaks want to control everything. And man, if control freaks are controlling everything, then God's not controlling anything. He can't use that. And so I had to go through some times over the last couple of years where I really just had to come to grips with the fact that if we were going to do what God had called this church to do in our community, we were going to have to step up, and I was going to have to step up and stop being a control freak leader. And so I began to meet with some mentors, some other people, and begin to get some ideas, begin to have some honest conversation. Man, some of them are difficult, but there's some principles I picked up along the way that I want to share with you today. They're in no particular order except for the first one, and that is this. Control is an illusion. We don't control anything, and if we're doing something for the kingdom of God, we really don't control anything. A couple years ago, I heard Pastor Stephen Furtick say that we can't create the wave, we can only ride the wave when God does. And that was huge for me, because I had to realize that really, it's one thing to drop on my knees and say, God, this is all about you, and give it to him, but it's another thing to actually give it to him. So I realized that unless God was ahead of this thing and not me, man, we were never going to see the kingdom and the vision and the goals that God set for our church. And so that was the first thing I do. I had to give it back to God. The second thing I do was give it back to our staff. I had a good friend of mine, Perry Noble, say, listen, you need to go talk to your staff, your leadership, and say, what is one thing I'm doing that you wish I would stop doing so I can be doing the things that only I can do? Now, that's a crazy thing, but here's the deal. I came back and I asked him, I said, listen, there are certain things that only I can do, but there's some other things I'm doing that prevent me from being what I need to be as a leader. What are some things I need to stop doing? And that was a hard conversation. At first, they looked at me like crazy, like, can we really answer this? And once we got past that, man, they had some great answers. And I began to realize these folks loved God as much as I did, loved unchurched people as much as I did, but loved the vision that we had as a church. And I just need to let them run with it. And so I pulled back and began to let go of those things that they recommended I let go of. And it was amazing to see what happened in our church, but also what happened in our leadership. All of a sudden now, they had the freedom to go out and live out the potential that they've had all along that I was just holding them back from. Another thing I had to do was sit down and figure out what are those one or two things that only I can do. Man, I met with some mentors. I prayed a lot. I met with our staff. I met with our leadership. And they helped me to find 2 or 3 things that only I can do and the things I'm best at. And while I do other things in the church, those 2 or 3 things define what my task looks like each week, what my calendar looks like. It doesn't mean I don't do other stuff. It just means that everything is filtered through those. And then the last thing I had to learn is the 80-20 rule. And it's a different 80-20 rule than most of you have heard in church leadership. If somebody in leadership can do it 80% of what was on your mind and your heart, don't worry about the other 20%. And man, that was a hard one for me to look up and say, is because I'd say, well, here's the vision, and I'd have this thing in my mind, and then they'd go do it and look totally different than what was in my mind. But what I began to realize is, if I would just lay out the vision, that was 80% of it. And then they would run the other 20%, and it would be so amazing what they do. It would just unleash their potential. And man, we began to see God move in that 20%. And if I had forced the 100%, God would have never moved. And we've got some great leaders. We've got some great volunteers. We've got a great church, but only because I had to stop being a control freak and let God roll with that and roll with the leadership and let them run with the ball. And so my hope is today you've learned some stuff about being a control freak. My hope is if you're dealing with that, you'll let that go. Man, that's my hope. That's my dream. I can tell you this. It's a difficult step, but it's the greatest step I've ever taken in leadership as a church planner. So I want to encourage you today. Listen, I hope you guys have a great weekend. I hope God moves in mighty ways in your church. Thanks a lot for watching the Nines today.